cul-de-sacs and the blocks, instead of being 350 feet long, 900 feet long. And it really makes it hard to walk when you have blocks that are that big. So we went to them and talked about it. We measured the value of the inner part of the city, not inner city in a negative sense, but the center part, the older part of the city. The value per acre was way more than it is on the cul-de-sacs because you have more real estate per acre. Do you really want to use up all the land? They have quite a bit of land for an old city. Do you want it? So they changed it. So it's 500-foot blocks instead of 900-foot blocks. And they also have changed their attitude about streets. So this is Route 20, otherwise in Chicago known as Lake Street. By the time it gets there, they call it Route 20. And the Illinois DOT wanted to build a freeway through the area. And the merchants along there felt like they'd be cut off, and the city felt they would divide the city into two parts. And so they wanted a different plan. And it's very similar to your Highway 53 situation. So instead of building a freeway through all that, they built a multi-way boulevard and put in the block structure similar to the older parts of the city. So instead of more cul-de-sacs, put in some blocks and streets so the traffic can distribute through those streets. So anyway, Highway 20 would be a multi-way boulevard, which would mean two fast-moving lanes in each direction, in the middle, a median with some trees on it, and then an outer lane which connects to the local street grid. And that way people could drive fast, but you could also have connections to the city. So we've met with the DOT, and they've been very polite about listening, and hopefully this kind of argument will happen all over the country, and maybe with Highway 53. At least the question should be asked, what adds the most value to La Crosse? What adds the most value to the metropolitan area? And I think you should look at it. Now I'm going to change, and I'm getting close to the end here, so you know. I want to talk about separate use zoning. I told you that it started happening in the 1920s. There was a court case in Cleveland, a suburb of Cleveland called Euclid, which tried to put in separate use zoning. The Supreme Court ruled that it was okay to do it, and they did. And also, even it started spreading even before that from a guy named Herbert Hoover, who loved it. Now, Herbert Hoover is not the image that you have of him. Herbert Hoover was not some mossback Republican who wanted to starve all the poor people and all that stuff. He was kind of liberal for a Republican, and he was Commerce Secretary under Harding and Coolidge. And while he was Commerce Secretary, he was in charge of the food program in Europe. He actually fed 1.5 million people in the Soviet Union. I mean, how much more left-wing can you get than that? But anyway, he had a lot of ideas. He was very progressive about things, and one idea that he wanted was separate use zoning. He thought it would cure the problems of cities, these slums and dark places where poor people huddled around fires, you know. He wanted to get rid of all that, spread it out, and make separate use zoning. And so he put it into all the codes that he could in the Commerce Department. When he became president in 1931, he issued an executive order making a model code for the United States with separate use zoning. And then Roosevelt became president, and I don't think he knew what he was doing, but when he did the Federal Housing Act, FHA was created, he loaded all that stuff in, and the banks, of course, weren't able to finance houses much. So they very quickly got addicted to these federal programs and conformed. Now, they had no real impact in Manhattan, because buildings are already tall there, but are very tall, but they put restrictions saying you had to have if you have residential in a building or in a development, that it could have a very, very small amount of non-residential. So, for example, for a multi-story building, you would be talking, in the case of the HUD regulations today, 10% of the building could be commercial. That means you have to have a 10-story building in order to have retail on the first floor. So it had a huge impact on like Midwestern cities or even Brooklyn. This is Flatbush Avenue in Brooklyn. You've got your 2 stories of apartments above the store. That's where Jackie Gleason and Audrey Meadows lived in the Honeymooner show, that kind of place. You couldn't build it today and get financing. And so that's why if you go to Brooklyn, on the Brooklyn side of the Brooklyn Bridge, you see all these 20-story buildings. They have retail on the first floor, but these glass and steel buildings have been built because the developers can't get financing. If you're not FHA eligible, it's not going to happen. You couldn't do Mayberry. There's Barney, Opie, and the Floyd's Barbershop. And remember, Barney's girlfriend, Thelma, lived above the barbershop in the apartment above. Can't do it. Can't build it and get it financed under FHA, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, all these programs. This is in Annapolis, sorry about that. Anyway, you know, this is the kind of thing that you can't do. And it becomes an historic neighborhood. Oh, we must be in an historic neighborhood. It's got a couple of apartments above it. I mean, you look around the country, it's only in the old places. Nothing new has it. Even like Bayshore Shopping Mall in Glendale outside of Milwaukee, the developer wanted to put apartments above the store, but he figured that he couldn't get financing. So he's got apartments way off on the side, and they have fake second floors. I don't think I brought a picture of that one, but they have fake second floors because they know the young people like that kind of scene. They like that sort of urban thing, whether it's Cedarburg or downtown Milwaukee. And here's the standards. They kind of vary by program, but you've got HUD 221D4, which right now most multiple family housing in the country is going through that program. About 90% of it goes through that program. And the rest of it, unless it's aimed at really super rich people that wouldn't even be eligible for anything, all the private financing is affected by that too. 10% of gross floor space. That means you have to have a 10-story building. So you have a place like Des Moines where typically you'd have a 5- or 6-story building with retail on the first floor. Forget about it. You got to go to 10. And the market might not want 10. And then you've got Fannie Mae at 20%, Freddie Mac at 25%. The Republicans talked about eliminating Fannie and Freddie, and then they go back to their districts, and the local National Association of Home Builder chapter shows up in their home office and says, hey, wait a minute, that's how we finance our business. Okay, then they go back to Washington and say, we want to reform Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. We don't want to eliminate it, we just want to reform it. Okay, so I got the reform. Get rid of these restrictions on let Mayberry be built new. Get rid of these restrictions. That's the reform you ought to do. Because it's led to stuff like this. This is Silver Spring, Maryland, and they're trying to do apartments around train stations further out on the line toward Rockville, and they're getting all these people complaining because they don't want this. I mean, would you want that? You know, and that's what, I mean, you know, maybe it's okay, but, you know, this is better. A developer did this with their own money because they had a trust fund that was so big they could afford it. But this is the Delmar stop on the Pasadena Gold Line, and it's got modest-sized buildings with retail on the first floors. In Seattle, you know, they try hard to try to figure out how to do it. This one barely made it. Or live-work housing, which the home builders have been trying to do for years. This was the featured program at their convention in 2003, and they went out and tried to do it, and they couldn't get financing. So they end up building stuff like this. You know, does that look like a village or a city? It's colonial windows and a big parking lot around it, but that's FHA finance. That's what's easy to finance. And people say, well, how did that happen? How's that? Well, it happens because the regulations are making it happen. Or this, there's a parking area underneath the apartments, so then they don't even have to worry about the ratio of retail. Now, this is in Milwaukee. Those of you that have been there on Brady Street, this is Mima's restaurant. Mima lives above the store. Imagine how efficient her commute is when she walks down in the morning. She's using almost no energy at all. What's wrong with it? Why should that be illegal? Why should that be a code violation?